Welcome to the United We Stand, the first symposium of what we plan to hold regularly conducted by American Pulse TV. We believe that together we definitely make a difference. With the spread of terrorism, we believe it is imperative that we address its issues. Before we proceed with the program, I would like to have a moment of silence, if we can rise up, for the souls of all the martyrs and the people that killed through terrorism in the whole entire world, starting at 9/11 attacks in the US and ending with the 21 Coptic Christians in Libya.
Thank you.
I would like to invite Ambassador Ahmed Farouk for the opening statements to give us his remarks about the symposium today.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. Initially, I would like to thank you for giving me the chance tonight to be among you, distinguished gathering, and to give the opening statement. I would like also to thank the organizer, Dr. Michael Morgan, for the effort he exerted to make this event come true. And I believe that such kind of gathering, it helps a lot to bridge the gap of misunderstanding that it may occur in between the different point of views. Actually, I have 15 minutes, and I will be very precise and concise, and I'll make my keynotes in two parts and a conclusion. The first part is the terrorism and its definition. The humanity, in its long history, has known many wars, epidemics, disasters, and I believe that terrorism is one of the most dangerous challenges that the humanity is facing nowadays. Allow me to mention that the Global Terrorism Index, which just has been issued in February 2015, this month, pointed out that since the beginning of the 21st century, the year 2000, the world witnessed 48,000 terrorist attacks. That led to 107,000 victims around the world. That means that the world receives 3,500 terrorist attacks annually, causing 20 victims every day. Despite of that, governments have been reluctant to formulate an agreed upon legally binding definition of the term terrorism. Various international conferences, legal systems, and agencies use different definitions. On the other hand, the international community has never succeeded in developing an accepted, comprehensive definition of terrorism. Since the second half of the 20th century, experts devoted more than 100 different definitions of terrorism in an effort to discover a broadly acceptable, reasonably comprehensive explication to the world. Some describe it as use of violence and intimidation to achieve some goals. Others, acts of violence committed by groups that view themselves as victims. And the third group, they found that terrorists is the use of violence and threats to intimidate for political purposes. Unfortunately, till that moment, there is neither an academic nor an international legal consensus regarding the definition of the term terrorism. These difficulties arise from the fact that the term is politically charged. Anyway, the search for an adequate definition is still on. In that context, I believe that as long as we'll continue dealing with a phenomenon without having a definition, a clear definition of it, as if we are giving an ill person medicine without knowing the diagnosis. Bottom line, terrorism is a crime. It's a felony. And a crime cannot be justifiable, no matter what. Meanwhile, it does not belong to a particular religion or any culture or political background. And if we go through the history, we realize that the one who assassinated the Crown Prince of Austria, caused the First World War, was an extremist Orthodox. And the one who assassinated Gandhi was extremist Hindu. And the one or the group who assassinated President Sadat was Islamic extremism. And the one who assassinated Prime Minister Rabin was an extremist Jew. Now, I will move to the second part of my speech, or the keynotes, which is the terrorism and situation in my country, in Egypt. In its modern history, Egypt started to know the organized terrorist crime at the beginning of the 20th century, specifically at the 20s of the last century, and more specific after the foundation of the Muslim Brotherhood group. It was founded as a religious, social, and political group. And allow me, just very briefly and rapidly, to point out some historical facts to what they committed and which is historically documented. In 1938, they founded what's so-called the generation of jihad among the youth in Egypt and sent messages to spread the idea among the Islamic states. In 1945, they assassinated Ahmed Maher, the Prime Minister of Egypt. 46, burning several police stations, same style of 2040 and 2015 that we are suffering today in Cairo and in Egypt. 1947, assassination of Nukrashi Basha, the Prime Minister of Egypt, again. 1948, burning of the Jew district in Cairo. 1949, assassination of Ahmed al-Khizindar, the judge of the Supreme Court of Egypt. 1952, the famous burning of Cairo. 1953, the trial to assassinate President Nasser. Of course, I can recite more facts and incidents, and I have a long, long list, but I don't want to take much of your time, and you can Google the incidents and the facts, and it is very well historically documented. The question that comes now, why? We have to ask this question, why they are doing this? This group was founded in 1928, in particular, to confront the influence of the modern Western state on the Islamic countries, to confront the concept of the modern state coming from the West on the Islamic countries, particularly after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, the Islamic Caliphate in Turkey. They simply created the ideology of the violent political Islam, announced their agenda aiming for 3 basic principles. And this is according to the references, teachers, books, messages, and they are also very well documented. The first principle is reviving the Islamic State, the Caliphate, reviving the Islamic State. The second principle, imposing the Sharia law on Muslims and non-Muslims in the Islamic countries. The third principle is the jihad, the wrong concept of the jihad. In Islam, the jihad is from within, but this is another concept of jihad. And simply, these are the 3 common basic principles of all the extremist groups around the world, started by the Muslim Brotherhood in the beginning of the 20th century and ending by ISIS and ISIL in the 21st century, at the first quarter of the 21st century. All the group, ISIS, ISIL, Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab in Somal, Al-Mujahideen in Mali, they cannot deny these 3 basic principles. And they say it out loud everywhere. We want reviving the Islamic State. They are naming it Islamic State. And we want to impose the Sharia law from their point of view. The Sharia law is very tolerant, it's very good, but from their point of view, from their concept. And to achieve these two goals, they go through the jihad, violent jihad, beheading people. The only group that maneuvering the three principles, because they are well educated, they well invested in the West, in the United States, they deep-rooted in the institutions all over the West, they have a very polished English language, is the Muslim Brotherhood. If you ask them these questions, if you see any one of the Muslim Brotherhood members, ask him a direct question and don't let him underestimate your mind and give you a direct answer. Are you ready to drop these three basic principles? Yes or no? He will keep maneuvering. Egypt now is facing a new wave of terrorism, again from the same specific group, the MB, and its affiliates in Sinai and on our west border. The crime they are committing every day against the safety and stability of the Egyptian society cannot be justifiable. That's why the voices saying that they are committing terror because they are victims and they need to be inclusive in the political process cannot be acceptable, neither by the government nor by the society, which is much more important than the government. Because they are simply blackmailing the whole society, either to rule the country or we're gonna burn it, all the country. Today we have a situation with our friends in the West, in particular here in the United States. Because what we consider them as a terrorist group, blackmailing the society every day for their hidden agenda, according to clear historical and recent physical and moral evidences, our American friends consider them as a political power on the ground. This point connects us again to the problem of the definition of the term and the word terrorism. To conclude, Egypt is a regional power in the Middle East with a 90 million of population. And no one can afford a state of chaos in Egypt. I repeat it again, no one can afford a state of chaos in Egypt. We set our modern and civil constitution. We elected our president, and we are heading to a parliamentary election, and by this we'll conclude the third and the last step of our roadmap towards a democratic modern state. We committed to fight terrorism in collaboration and in coordination with the international community, without distinguishing between bad terrorists, which must be defeated, and good terrorists, which can be accommodated. Egypt and the United States have a true strategic partnership. And I believe that the two countries need each other nowadays more than ever. We hope that our American friends send a strong message to the extremists that they have no chance to be included in any political process as long as they are using violence, they are blackmailing the society through terrorism and sabotage to the facilities of the country every day. Without this strong message, they will continue to ask for illogical and unrealistic demands. They have to drop their ideology, make themselves clear who they are, what is their history, what is the agenda, how many members they have, how can I be a member, how can I have an application to be a member. Are the members Egyptians or from all over the world? They have to make themselves clear: either working in politics or keep promoting the religion. But they cannot do both. Finally, I hope we stand united. I believe that this is the most important slogan, that we have to raise and work together to confront our imminent threats of terrorism. Thank you, and I hope I didn't take much of your time. Thanks so much.
Might be how many lives of terror end. It can begin here at home and in the suburbs of Sydney. A 7 News investigation has uncovered a video which makes very clear the intent is to brainwash children and teach them to hate Australia.
Watch as 4 Australian children aged 6 to 13 call for an end to our way of life.
These are disturbing and shocking images, and they do raise concerns about the welfare of the 4 young boys who are identified in them.
A group calling itself the Muslim Youth Project runs regular events for young children. In this one held late last year, the boys rally under the banner Soldiers of Khilafah, the 6-year-old proclaiming,
"You're never too young to be a soldier for Khilafah."
I'm sure a lot of us have been affected by what we've seen and all the damage and destruction that happened all over the world. I would like to start the panel with discussion with our elite speakers today. Our panelists today represent a wide range of experience in international affairs and in some cases its effect on the Egyptian American community. Let me introduce Senator Martin Golden. Senator Martin Golden is a New York senator. His Brooklyn district has a heavy Egyptian population, an Arabic population. Senator Golden's background is in public safety, law and order. Welcome, Senator Golden. My second guest on the list, Dr. Helb London. Dr. Helb London is the president of London Center for Policy Research and a member of Council on Foreign Relations. Dr. London had a lengthy meeting with now President Sisi when he was running for that office. My next guest would be Judith Miller. Hi, Judy. Judith, the journalist contributing editor, Manhattan Institute City Journal. She's a Fox News commentator and the author of a forthcoming memoir in April, The Story of Reporter Journey, Simon and Schuster. During the Iraq War, she was the only reporter to be embedded for 4 months with the 75 Expeditionary Task Force. In 2002, Ms. Miller was part of the small team that won a Pulitzer Prize for explanatory journalism for her series on Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. Welcome. My next guest on the list, J.D. Gordon, please. J.D. Gordon is the executive director at Protect America Today and owner of J.D. Communications. He was a former Defense of Department spokesman under Defense Secretaries Rumsfeld and Gates, and he's contributing editor to Fox News as well. My last but not least on the guest, Dr. Robert Michael. Welcome. Dr. Michael is the chairman of the Committee of Middle East and North African Affairs for the New York City Bar Association and a member of its Council on International Affairs. He is also the chairman of Islamic Law Committee of the American branch, the International Law Association. I would like to invite the panelists to give me 2 minutes per each open statement, and I'll start with Dr. Robert Michael.
Well, thank you first, Dr. Morgan. This is a wonderful event and certainly something that we should all be proud to be part of. I certainly am. As the, I guess, representative of the legal profession here, it's a difficult situation because while we talk a great deal about the importance of the rule of law means so many different things to so many different people. Those of you who may have read the Soviet Constitution or the Nazi Constitution, they read very well, especially the Soviet one, and yet how enforced means everything. Similarly, in this area, when you talk about an Islamic State, a caliphate, when you talk about various interpretations of Islamic law, of Sharia, you run into very different meanings of the word rule of law. The main thing that I think we as Americans, as New Yorkers, as New York lawyers, as international lawyers, and I also used to chair the Committee of Foreign and Comparative Law of the New York City Bar, is to follow the principle, and I know I was talking to Ambassador Farouk about this before, how important, and he made it, education and economics. And the rule of law, I think, is best effected when it is used as a tool to educate people about the various kinds of law, the various principles of law that can create a platform, a leveling ground to give people rights and give them a voice so they don't feel frustrated, so they have access to remediation, to benefits that can be universal. And it's a goal that has never been reached. We like to think in this country we come as close as one can, but we're a long way off, and I think we aspire to make everyone better through the use of law in a positive way.
All right, thank you very much. J.D. Gordon.
Thank you so much to Dr. Michael Morgan for organizing this wonderful exchange of ideas tonight. I really appreciate it, and we should all be proud of the work you're doing to try to get the word out about what's really going on in the U.S. and Egypt.
Thank you very much. I'm flattered.
Great to see Ambassador Farouk as well. I appreciate your comments tonight, sir. They were very enlightening. Just very briefly, I think it's very important to recognize that we've always fought violent extremists to defend ourselves. In 1901, President McKinley was assassinated by Leon Soglos up in Buffalo. He was an anarchist. And then we all know President Kennedy was assassinated by Lee Harvey Oswald, who was a communist. So no religion has a monopoly on violent extremists. But today, as I often make the rounds on TV and radio, I say if Leon Soglos and Lee Harvey Oswald were alive today, they would probably be radical Islamists, because that is the current threat that we face globally now from this violent extremism. It's from radical Islam. And I applaud leaders, brave leaders, courageous leaders like President al-Sisi, who have the courage to stand up and say what the problem is, to confront Islam from within the society. I also applaud King Abdullah in Jordan. He understands the problem is from the Muslim Brotherhood and extremists. Also, the Crown Prince of Bahrain has stood up and said the truth. So why hasn't President Obama had the same type of moment of truth? And I'll get to that in the panel remarks, but very quickly, it's because the international left supports Islamists or sympathize with Islamists. They used to sympathize with communists decades ago. That's no longer cool. But it is cool for the international left to support Islamists, and I believe President Obama is from the left. He's a leftist. And that's why he has the support for the Muslim Brotherhood. That's why even if you look at a group like the Brookings Institution, the biggest and most famous think tank in the United States, if you look at GuideStar, their charity navigator, where they get their money, $21 million from Qatar over the last several years. That buys you a lot of influence. So when you see an op-ed in the Washington Post, in the New York Times, written by Brookings, attacking President al-Sisi, supporting the Muslim Brotherhood, well, look where the money came from. With that, I'll pass it to Judith.
Just a clarification, I think J.D. Gordon meant Islamic extremist, right?
Yeah, of course.
All right, okay.
That's what we're talking about, radical Islam.
Yes, thank you very much.
Hi, good evening. I hope you can all hear me. I'm delighted to be here, and thank you, Michael, for organizing this.
Thank you for coming. I appreciate it.
Thank you, all of my fellow panelists, and it's great to see Herb London. One of the last times I got a chance to spend some time with Herb London was actually in Cairo. I think we had 4 wonderful days together, and we saw the man who would soon become the president of Egypt, who was then the de facto already leader of Egypt. But he talked to us at great length about the need for our country, for NATO, for Egypt, and for its allies to fight Islamic extremism. He did not mince words. He called it what it was. And he said, and I remembered looking back at the interview that I wrote, he said, the only thing they know is destruction. Osama bin Laden was only the first. And when I think of what's happened since our meeting with the now president, the fighting in Libya, the training camps that have been set up to train jihadis, President Sisi's effort to reclaim the Sinai and stabilize it, I realize how prescient his remarks were, even at the time that he was just thinking about what he would do if he were elected. I remember my own country's response, our own country's response to his election and the unseating of the Muslim Brotherhood. I was in Egypt the week of Tahrir Square, and then what I call the second revolution, which was the removal of President Morsi. And America's response was to debate whether or not to call this, once again, we're having a semantic debate, debate whether to call it a military coup or not, but also to deprive Egypt of $240 million out of the $1.5 billion in in economic aid that the country normally has gotten because of its allied status with us. President Sisi has continued to do extraordinary things. The speech that we now know, thanks in part to social media, rather than the mainstream newspapers, which were very slow to pick it up. His call for a reformation in Islam. And now the grand imams of Al-Azhar's call for a revolution in the teaching of religion. These things are extraordinary. And yet, President Obama could not bring himself to say one word about President Sisi's courageous stance during a 3-day conference on violent extremism. I'm disappointed in this because I believe in calling things what they are. I think to fight them, you have to first know what you're fighting. And to deny the Islamic component, the perversion of Islam that these jihadis have used to recruit the young and the ignorant, those who are ignorant of the religion, is to fail to appreciate what one needs to do in order to fight them. We can't do it without the Muslim community, the Egyptians, the Jordanians, the people who are stepping up to this fight should be commended by us, not criticized. I know Egypt is not perfect. I know there are human rights violations, as my friend Saadetdin Ibrahim keeps reminding me, and all of us. But I think at the moment there's a broader fight going on, a compelling fight for Egypt, which is to stabilize the country, to restore security for Egyptians so that the economy can recover and grow and Egyptians can come to have their expectations met. I'm sorry if I went a little over a minute, but I'll be briefer in the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy, for your remarks. Dr. Herb London.
Great pleasure to be with you. And Ambassador Farouk, thank you very much for your comments. And Michael, thank you for the leadership that you've provided.
My pleasure.
This year, 2015, is very much like 1848. All of the assumptions about the past have been called into question. We are living in a very tumultuous period. Tumultuous in many ways. When Sykes-Picot, a member of the British Foreign Service and the French Foreign Service, sat down and drew lines in the sand, creating Lebanon, creating Iraq, creating Syria. These were artificial nations. Those nations were created artificially, and now they do not exist. They do not exist because of the terrorism in that area. The United States' response has been very, very inadequate in my judgment, and largely because the president has made a very accommodative stance with Iran, thinking that in these negotiations over nuclear weapons in Vienna, the United States can allow Iran to, at the very least, have fissile material. Most of the discussions at this moment deal with very specific technical questions, how many centrifuges, how much enrichment will occur, but not whether Iran will have nuclear weapons or the opportunity for breakout. Why do I bring this up? Because these ideas, this American position, has created a vacuum. That vacuum will be filled, and it will be filled by Sunni nations deeply concerned about this rapprochement. And that will be Egypt, and Saudi Arabia, and Jordan, and Kuwait, and the United Arab Emirates. These 5 nations will form, in my judgment, a defense condominium, and it will be led by Egypt. President Sisi has already made it clear. He's provided both the emotional leadership and the ideological leadership. The speech in Al-Azhar was a remarkable speech. I've often called it the Martin Luther of the 21st century. You may remember, Martin Luther challenged the church by saying, "How dare you sell salvation, tickets to salvation?" And here is President al-Sisi saying that we have to look at our own religion and what has caused this violence. He has made it perfectly clear that a revolution from within is necessary. This is remarkable leadership. He's taken the leadership in also reaching out to the Copts in the country, suggesting that after the murder of 21 Copts, Egypt will respond in Libya. It will not sit back. It will attack ISIS. Now, one would hope that that leadership would come from the United States. You may remember there were great leaders in America who understood the threats from abroad. Looking over my shoulder is Teddy Roosevelt. He carried a big stick. He understood how important it was for the United States to provide the kind of military, ideological, and cultural leadership across the globe. El-Sisi now is the Teddy Roosevelt of our time, and in my judgment, provides the leadership that the nations must possess in the Middle East in order to combat terrorism. Thank you.
Senator Gordon.
Thank you. I'd like to thank you, Michael, again for putting this together. As our panel has all thanked you. This is a great attendance here today and a great panel. I come from Brooklyn, and the individuals that were responsible for the 94 bombing across the street from my office lived on the second floor. Muhammad Atta was in Brooklyn, Bay Ridge, back in the 90s. We've seen the terror in this nation. And I agree with our panel. Our nation has not led. Our nation has let this nation down and the world. We've seen the lead up to the World War I and to World War II. And today, there is pits in people's stomachs across the United States and across Europe because of the fear of when the next shoe is going to drop. And I didn't even get into the Middle East yet. Think about living in the Middle East and watching what we just seen. Burning people alive, chopping people's heads off, children being killed in crossfire, women being sold as sex slaves. We've seen this going on, and of course the argument about going into Iraq, whether we should or shouldn't have. Leaving Iraq was definitely the wrong thing to do. And I got to tell you, if we look at what's happened since 2010, Tunisian government falling, Egypt twice changing governments, got it right this time. The fall of Libya, the fall of Yemen, not once, but twice. And then we see the Arab Spring, we see Syria, and we see Iraq. That is the fertile ground that we see across the Middle East, but in those particular countries where you see the breeding of ISIS and the wars that are going on within those countries, soldiers actually leaving their positions, dropping their weapons, fearful of having their heads cut off. Think about what's going on, not just in the Middle East, North Africa, but think of what's going on in the peoples and the different countries around this great world. Ladies and gentlemen, tumultuous is a good word, but it's even worse than that. Egypt, their leadership, and others are right. We need to be able to do this from within, but the United States has to get into the game. The United States has to be more cohesive with other nations within the Middle East and around the world. And I know I may disagree with some of my colleagues here today, but it may be to a point that we have to actually, after we have and do come together with other nations, not a few, about 40 different nations we need to come together with. And if we can do that where we need to put people on the ground. We need to be able to get rid of ISIS because they cannot do it alone in these nations. These nations are only going to breed more and more terrorism. We're going to see more and more lone wolves. We're going to see more organizations coming out of these different countries into our countries across Europe and the United States, and we're going to see more death. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Golden. And actually, that's why we have United We Stand. We need to unite so we can stand together. In our format today, I shall pose a question and then direct it to the panel member. After the answer is complete, I welcome any panelists to add further on the topic. So we'll start with the executions of the Coptic Christians in Libya brought the peril of ISIS to Egypt's doorstep. What is the risk for their incursion into Egypt itself? And I would like to start with Dr. London.
Well, there is no doubt that the Muslim Brotherhood has spawned a good many terrorist organizations. Not merely the Brotherhood. The Brotherhood established in 1928, but people do not realize that it was the money from the Muslim Brotherhood that established Al-Qaeda in the first place. Jordanians were largely responsible. Muslim Brotherhood members of Jordan were largely responsible for it. Now, what I think is critical is that the 500,000, roughly 500,000 members of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt do represent a threat. There is no question. When we in the United States speak cavalierly of human rights violations in Egypt, we overlook the fact that there are 500,000 potential terrorists in Egypt that want to kill al-Sisi and want to destroy the government. Even though that is a relatively tiny portion of the 90 million in the society, it represents a very serious threat. So my feeling is that we are not seeing an end to this situation. And we will see that there is more violence in Egypt and across the Middle East. It is just the beginning. We are going to engage in a long, long war. And as I indicated before, the war is not merely a military battle. It's also an ideological battle, which is one of the reasons why I was so impressed with the speech that President al-Sisi gave at Al-Azhar. That struck me as a very important ideological point, because you have to be able to make the argument that there's something wrong, there's something fundamentally wrong with the arguments that are being made by the Muslim Brotherhood. So we've got to fight on two fronts. One, on the battlefield, where it's necessary to defeat the Muslim Brotherhood, but two, defeat them ideologically as well.
Go ahead.
I just want to make add to what Herb said, and that is that Egypt's Christian population is now the largest Christian population left in the Middle East. It's 10% of roughly 94 million people, and they are people who are the original Egyptians, and their fate, the fact that they should feel welcome and comfortable and able to succeed in their own country, will largely determine whether or not Egypt succeeds in regaining its equilibrium, and therefore the protection of their rights and their aspirations is crucial to the broader good, not only of Egypt, but of the Middle East. So it's very important what, as Herb said, what President Sisi did, the fact that he went to the largest Coptic Christian church and stood with the Christians at a moment of intense anxiety after the murder of the beheading of the 21. Those are important signals to people who feel very besieged and have largely been driven out of many other Arab countries.
The Egyptian government retaliated with airstrikes, as with Jordan. Was that an appropriate response, J.D. Gordon?
Yes, I believe it was the appropriate response. The Egyptian fighter jets were able to target Islamic State affiliates in Derna, Libya. I think that was entirely appropriate and timely. They got some pushback, if you can believe it, from the White House, which is hard to believe, actually, for Americans to even think that that could happen. But you have to look at the mentality. It's the mentality of Oliver Stone, the mentality of the Nation of Islam in the 1960s, that American power is the problem, that there's colonialism in the world. One of my favorite pictures, actually, is Che Guevara in his uniform in 1959 in the Gaza Strip with Palestinian leaders. He wasn't there for his health. He was there because the international left supports the Islamist cause. And so I think unless we have a change in the White House, we need to keep supporting Egypt to take care of their own security. And the horrific beheading we saw of 21 Coptic Christians should not go unanswered. And so Egypt must act in their own security, in their own defense.
What about in Sinai? Would airstrike there be beneficial, Ms. Miller?
I mean, I never got higher than corporal in the 2 years I was in the Army during the Vietnam War, so it's a little above my pay grade. Tactics from the air have proven to be useful. They were successful in Kosovo. They were successful in Libya. When they are not backed up by ground troops, you have to be somewhat fortunate. I think that when it's in your own country, as Sinai is in Egypt, then air can soften things up. I think when you have a situation like in ISIS, where they have now occupied a territory, and part of the program we had at the City Bar a few months ago, one of the issues was, does ISIS qualify as a state under international law? They've made themselves a much easier target from the air. The classic Mao theory of an army should be like fish in the sea, as in the population. It's very hard for a civilized government to attack from the air. Obviously targeting is getting better, but you can have that awful euphemism, collateral damage, when you attack from the air as when you attack from the ground. I think in Egypt, given that Sinai, again, is within its territorial limits, the air might be a nice start, but I don't think it should end there.
Ms. Miller, would you like to comment on that?
Well, I think the problem in the Sinai goes beyond the terrorists. I mean, I think for a long, long time, the Bedouin there, the people who live there, feel that they have been ignored by Cairo and that not a lot was done for them. And therefore, there's a lot that needs to be done. This is not a problem that can be solved simply by military power, nor, I believe, can ISIS be confronted alone by military power. It's going to take a lot more than that. And that's why I think, in this respect, the President and our President El-Sisi are correct when they talk about a generational struggle. But surely the kind of development that's taken place in other parts of Cairo often hasn't taken place in the Sinai, and they're very rich pockets, but they're great sources of tourism. But a lot of the people have grievances that need to be addressed, and I'm not talking about just creating jobs for them.
I know. Senator Golden, on Sun, the U.S. was not informed before the Egyptian airstrikes. Should military action be coordinated among allies? And was that important at that level?
I think I stated that in my opening statement. I believe that we need to not only have and support Egypt and nations that are doing what they're supposed to do when it comes to dealing with terrorism. We need to be able to support them not only by air, but by land as well. And whatever these countries need, they need to have our support there. Our president has failed us there and continues to fail us there. And the longer this continues to go on, the worse it will get. And Egypt is just part of it. When we take a look at the world that I pointed out earlier, it's, Mr. Miller pointed out the number of Christians and the number being killed. ISIS is killing far more Muslims, but you don't see that. You only see what the Christians and the Christian churches that are being burnt, which is by far terrible, terrible thing to happen. But there were more Muslims dying across the Middle East than Christians and Jews together. And it's going to get worse, much worse, if we do not put a group together and go in there and support the nations that want to support and bring our troops with the troops from other nations and go into these countries and assist.
Mahdi Afifi. First of all, allow me to thank you all for being here and thank Michael for a wonderful event and a wonderful discussion that enlightened a lot of people, us and you also, for having this exchange. A lot of people talked here about war and the need for, of course, to combat terrorism and combat ISIS. But as the US, we invest so much in the Middle East, but most of our investment is in terms of war machinery. Aren't we thinking now about education? As you all know, people come from Egypt, especially here to the US, to get better education. Best colleges in Egypt are the AUC, American University in Cairo. But I don't see too many people talking about investing in Egypt in terms of education. Can someone shed a light on this?
On Wall Street, there's a concept called IRR, internal rate of return, that drives everything. It means how much money do you get back for the money you invest. War is good business. One of the things about war that's nice is you produce things, they blow up, and you have to produce more things. Until you can find a way to make education profitable, I don't think you're going to find it as an attractive investment.
We invested in something called the GI Bill at the end of World War II. That was an extraordinary investment, and it had an enormous payoff, enormous. In large part because education is an appropriate investment, and you do get a rate of return. If people are paying taxes at a higher rate, you get a rate of return. You generate wealth. So I don't buy the line that you cannot invest in education. I think, one, it's essential, and it's one of the building blocks in creating a society. I think that it's very important, for the United States to consider the kind of educational projects that would make a difference. When people can't find jobs and they have a college degree, they leave Egypt and they go to Europe or the United States. And so that is a problem. You want to keep that talent in the country because these are the people who potentially are your feedstock for the creation of wealth.
Just two things. One, the GI Bill was investing on our own people. Well, the Marshall Plan would be a better example, but that was invested in infrastructure. And the other case in point is India. India produces hundreds of thousands of engineers. They have the most incredible system of postgraduate and professional engineers, doctors, and so on. They don't have jobs. It's a terrible situation in India because of that. You have all these highly qualified people have no place to do, and that can be frustrating. So, yes, if you can find ways to invest in your own education. My GI Bill didn't do me any good because they just deducted it from my fellowship in law school, but it did help a lot of people, and it's certainly a great way. I'm not suggesting education isn't a good investment internally. I'm just saying, you asked the question, why can't we get people to invest? Why can't we get Wall Street to invest in education? It's hard to generate a return. It's somewhat like the microfinance business that the Grameen Trust developed. It's a wonderful way economically to help people at the lowest portion of the economy. It's very hard to make it work economically as an investment. And the history of the microfinance industry internationally shows you that. It's an arc. People come in, they get returns, and then it gets refinanced on conventional mortgages. It's just difficult to do it and justify it when your only goal is economics.
Next question.
Thank you. Don Fleming and Mike.
I'm sorry, hold on, Don.
Sure.
Sure.
I thank you very much. I'm out of the order, but I just want to comment on the economic position and the economic side in Egypt now. I just want to mention, as an official here, it is not that gloomy. We have difficulties. We have a lot of challenges that faces the economy, but meanwhile, we have mega projects ongoing. And the Egyptians who are living abroad and the Egyptians all over the world, even the Egyptian inside the country, they are investing a lot of money in these mega projects. We have an economic conference, international economic conference, within the couple of weeks coming in March 15 and 16. And from my position here as a Consul General in New York, I issued approximately a couple of hundred entry visas for American companies and American businessmen that are willing to invest and are willing to put their money in Egypt because they have the market, they have the manpower, the cheap manpower, and they have the central position in the area. The point of safety and security it's very important, it's very essential for any businessman or any multinational company, but it's up to you. It's up to stop encouraging one side that he wants to impose his ideology. He wants to impose, as I mentioned in my keynote, he wants to impose his illogic and unacceptable demands on all the society. This is the main situation that we have with the West in general and with our American friends. We have to stop encouraging this side and just stop pressure on the recent government and let her doing its job. Thank you so much.
Go ahead, Donna.
Okay. Don Fleming again, and thank you, Mike, for arranging this. And to the panelists, we thank you very much for your insight. My wife is Egyptian. She's Muslim. She said to me the other night, I want you to consider this, and any one of you can also chime in. You know, Don, we got out in the streets, 35 million plus, and got rid of a cancer, as she has stated it. Why don't Americans do the same? It's Facebook, technology, media, we used it. And I said to her, well, we have a rule of law here. We have checks and balances here. In other words, BS. And it might lead to anarchy.
People in America don't recognize what they have. They've forgotten their history. They've forgotten, and it's being not in certain schools and many across this nation, not even taught our history. That is another problem. The true history of where this nation, and especially when it came to foreign wars, how we got involved in these foreign wars, why we were involved in these foreign wars, and what was our role in these foreign wars. I will tell you right now, if you were to walk through our communities, the only thing you feel in the communities in our city is there's a pit in their stomach when it comes to, like I said, economics, because they feel that a shoe is about to drop in their lives. They cannot pay their mortgages in certain cases, or just barely pay their mortgages and rent. There is not enough income in the family, and jobs are not out there. There's a number of people that are underemployed and unemployed that have stopped looking for jobs. So the unemployment numbers are not really what they should be, as they are shown here in the state of New York and across this country. So those are some of the things, and when it comes to the education, our educational system needs help. Our educational system needs to engage more so across this nation. Core curriculum is in the process of doing that. A lot of people here on this panel may agree or disagree on core curriculum, but at least I believe it's moving in the right direction. I believe this state should move in that same direction, and will very shortly. That will help us to be able to create what I believe is a better educated product, our children, as we move forward.
I'd like actually to hear from J.D. Gordon before he has to leave in 5 minutes to catch his train to Washington.
One very brief comment, if I may.
Sure.
Because I do think this nation suffers from historical amnesia. So that would be an answer to your second question. 2001 seems like ancient history. And so people do not even remember 9/11. And I've spoken to young people today, and they say, what happened in 9/11? So it's quite remarkable to me that we do face a very real crisis, largely because of the complacency and the fact that people do not understand our own history, even contemporary history.
Tell your wife that the strength of the American government is its institutions, not its people. And the reason that we are who we are, whether you call it exceptional or the best or just America, and we have succeeded as a democracy, and we don't have 33 million people in the streets trying to change the government, is because we believe in our institutions, and they are stronger than the people who happen to be occupying them at any given moment.
Go ahead.
Hannah Ibrahim, I have a question for you before you go off the plane. You said that there's nothing that cannot be fixed by good elections. I wish I am as optimistic as you are. I'm not. And the reason is because I know, and you know, that there has been infiltration in the government. The infiltration has been for the longest time, and they are like sleeping cells. They're laying low, and they're all over the government, not just in the White House, in senator's office, in governors, in training, lawyers, everywhere. And those infiltrations are like poking holes. So the institutions are strong, but you're poking holes in them. And those holes could make the whole building collapse. And that's why I'm not as optimistic. What is the government going to do about it? Thank you.
Well, I think that in 2016 we'll have another chance for leadership in the White House, and I think everybody here could ask the tough questions. When you see an op-ed from Brookings Institute, for instance, criticizing President al-Sisi and just drawing attention to the human rights issues, ask the hard questions. Where are they getting their money? $21 million from Qatar in the last few years. There's even an article in the Washington Post about it. Not an op-ed, but an article. So everybody here could question, when they hear support for the Ikhwan, when they hear just these rampant attacks from the White House against President al-Sisi, ask the hard questions. Where's that money coming from? Who is supporting the Brotherhood? And I think we can fix this country, and I think we will have new leadership in 2016 that will turn it around.
Last question before the
Hi, Sahar Kyriakos. I'm Egyptian American, been here for 30 years, invested my money in the country of Egypt actually right now. building restaurants. I have a comment quickly, and then I have a question. My comment is Egypt is a sovereign nation. If you want to strike ISIS because it attacked our citizen, we do not need a permission from the United States. If you want to throw the Muslim Brothers out of office because they're a regime put by the United States, as people, we do not need permission from the United States to do so because we are a sovereign nation. My question is, why do you think President Obama is so cozy with the Muslim Brothers? You just said that they're getting millions of dollars. The office of the President of the United States is being bought by Qatar. The Prince of Qatar is visiting the White House today, I think. And why do you think he's so cozy with the Muslim Brothers?
Who are you directing your question to?
Any one of the panel that would like to answer the question.
This is a question that involves a lot of speculation. There's no way of knowing what is in the mind of President Obama. Rudy Giuliani attempted to explain that the other day by suggesting that he's not really an American, not pro-American. I'm not going to engage in that kind of speculation. But I think that it's important to understand that he has drawn a conclusion that the United States' involvement in world affairs over the last 50 years or so has had nothing but a negative effect on world attitudes. His belief is that he would make a great change by reaching out to the Muslim world and creating an environment very different, much more accommodative than existed in the past. He sees himself as Nixon going to China. He sees himself in a role very different from presidents in the past. He has obviously created a new pathway for American foreign policy. So I think that in his mind, he is doing what is necessary to bring about stability. In my judgment, it's misguided. But that's just my judgment. But I'm merely speculating about what the president is thinking. There's no one who knows what the president is thinking, plus the fact it's also a question of what his advisors suggest. And the president is, to some degree, quite insular. His advisors are people like Valerie Jarrett and Susan Rice and Samantha Power. These are the people who see the president on a regular basis. They have a bias of their own, and I suspect it's a bias that the president shares. So my own view is he sees himself in the position of changing the character of American foreign policy, in fact, talking about less foreign policy. His goal is to really create an America that's developed, not worry terribly much about foreign affairs. But Trotsky, who I do not normally quote, once said, "You may not want war, but war may want you." And that's the position Americans find themselves in at the moment.
Just a brief addition. I think perhaps President Obama drew the wrong lesson from the election of President Morsi in 2011 by 51% of the vote. That I think perhaps this was not a president who had a great depth of knowledge about the Middle East or the world, in fact, before he became president. And he did not understand the history of the Brotherhood as it related to Egypt. And he saw them as just another political party that commanded a large amount of support from the Egyptian people. And while that might have been okay, perhaps if you're Egyptians, you see that as a mistake, or ahistorical, but I think the bigger mistake was to fail to understand what we've talked about on this panel, which was the 33 million who came out after a year saying, this man's destroying our country and we want our country back. That, to me, was the failure and the inability to recognize what the Muslim Brotherhood is in the context of Egypt. It's not that in some other countries, at least it doesn't manifest itself in that way. So once again, I'd say you have to judge this movement in its context. Thank you.
I would just add one thing, what I was saying in the beginning, the alliance between the international left and the Islamists. So I believe President Obama is a leftist, and he basically has sympathy for the Islamists. If he had spent 1% of the time focused on Malala, the girl in Pakistan who was shot in the head for going to school, and Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who's a great hero and a patriot for the world human rights, 1% of his time focused on them instead of the Guantanamo detainees, we'd have a better world today.
All right, thank you very much. I would like to thank all my participant panelists. Great discussion, wonderful points, right on. Thank you very much, and I I really appreciate your presence today. I would like to welcome Ambassador Frank Wisner. I'm very privileged and honored to have Ambassador Wisner and his lovely wife to our event. Thank you very much for coming. Ambassador Wisner was an ambassador of America in Egypt for so long. He's in love with Egypt, with the Egyptian people, and you'll find out when he started talking Arabic.
Dr. Morgan, good evening. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I'm enormously pleased to be with you all this evening, and I apologize for arriving late. I would have wished to have been here for the entirety of the panel discussion. I heard quite spirited exchanges, and I feel that there is probably very little that I can add except to make it clear that the evening is drawing to a close and I shouldn't detain you for too long. But I do, for a moment, I want to have a chance to tell you how much I appreciate the work that so many of you are doing. Dr. Morgan, you yourself, in building bridges between the United States and Egypt, maintaining the traditions of her great civilization in this country, and maintaining a very clear focus on the importance of the relationship that our two countries enjoy. I come as well this evening with a deep sense of sadness, a deep sadness. My apologies, perhaps if I hold that. I come this evening to join all of you with a deep sense of sadness over the recent tragedy, the ghastly events that occurred on the coast of Libya, and the wanton slaughter of 20-some quite innocent and decent people by Daesh, by the ISIS, by the radicals, and that these were Egyptians really wounded me deeply, and I know all of you. So I express, in a sense, solidarity with each of you who has suffered a sense of loss. As I came this evening, it was my hope to think with you for a moment about this country and about Egypt, and about where the both of us are headed. You've heard quite sharply divided views from the audience this evening. You've heard those who've said the United States favors the Muslim Brothers. The president has a bias in that regard. You've heard others regret a continuing bias in American policy against the better interests of the relationship and indeed of Egypt. Let me take a step back and ask all of you to think, as I was fortunate enough to think some 30, 40 years ago, when the Egyptian-American relationship, as we knew it then and still need to know it today, began on the basis of a strategic understanding between our two countries. Egypt had gone through several decades of war with Israel, with an experiment in economic policy that had, to a large degree, impoverished the Egyptian nation. Egypt was struggling to deal with the demands of a rising young population, and at the same time to find peace and exercise her national influence in the region. It was thanks, of course, to President Anwar al-Sadat at that time that Egypt recalculated her position in the world. And part of that recalculation was a decision to reach out to the United States. I won't review the history except to say that I was fortunate enough to stand at the barrage with Cyrus Vance and President Sadat, and to remember at that moment, post-1973, in the American-Egyptian relationship, there were very clear understandings about the principles that undergirded the Egyptian-American relationship. Those principles, to remind you, included the following major elements. First, Egypt and the United States would serve each other's causes well if we both worked for peace and stability in the Middle East at large. Second, that the United States and Egypt needed to work together to bring about peace between Israel and Egypt, and from a peace between Israel and Egypt, a broader peace between Israel and the rest of the Arab world. And that included, three, a very important commitment of the United States to work with Egypt to spread the peace that had been achieved between the United States, Israel, and Egypt to include the Palestinians, and to make a major new effort to find common ground between the Palestinians and the Israelis that would end the occupation and produce a two-state solution. The understanding further was based on the principle that Egypt needed to turn its national security structure around and rebuild its military strength, to move away from its dependence on Soviet arms doctrines, and to align itself more completely with the United States. In return, we undertook a responsibility to make certain that Egypt's security and the equipment of our armed forces was adequately protected. But as any armed forces, the armed forces of any nation, the security of any nation, lies on the final principle, and that is that Egypt needed a stronger economy, and that economy should be the object of both American public investment and American private investment. When I arrived, ladies and gentlemen, in Egypt in the mid-1980s, these principles continued to undergird the relationship between Cairo and Washington, between our two nations. And they provided an ample space where we didn't necessarily agree on every single point, but where we didn't agree, we could look at one another and say, I'll give you some space to pursue your own direct national interests. Occasionally, we came together at really dramatic moments. I was honored, privileged to participate in and witness the commitment of two Egyptian divisions in the first Gulf War, young Egyptians who marched to the battlefront beside young Americans, and the outcome was the liberation of Kuwait. To that degree, there was extraordinary identity of views, and in recognition of the suffering, of the burdens that Egypt had borne in the first Gulf War, the United States engaged in equivalent acts of measured support for the Egyptian people and the Egyptian economy. I left Egypt at the early part of the 90s, feeling that this relationship, the relationship between Egypt and the United States, was one of the main pillars that undergirded my nation's policy towards the region, and was the best hope that Egypt had to modernizing its society and rejoining the progressive community of nations to move young Egyptians into a better and more hopeful future. It was, I have to continue, something of a disappointment in the course of the 1990s and then into the first decade of this century that I noticed these principles began to be less clear. And instead, with the end of the Cold War, the United States took to itself a view that with the end of the Cold War, we were achieving a new age in the world, an arrival of democracy. Democracy as we saw it, standards that we would judge other nations by to match our own experience as a land, our own belief. And instead of assessing carefully the political, economic, social, cultural, and religious dynamics of nations abroad, we began to espouse what later came to be called a freedom agenda. Now, these two principles, internal political change in many nations abroad, including in Egypt, and at the same time, the core security of interests of the United States, began to act as rivals in the minds of Washington. And we began to face increasing contradictions in the way we managed our relationships with Cairo. At the very same time, I will be frank with all of you, Egypt's own political institutions began to atrophy. President Mubarak had served decades in office, and here he was in the latter days, and the changes that needed to come about in Egypt were increasingly difficult to achieve. I pass on this lightly because I deeply believe that it isn't the role of Americans to judge other nations' politics and societies within a measure, particularly when there is a strong and important relationship. But I remark on that because the ability of Egypt to adapt at this period of change in our own views became less and less obvious. Well, we reached the dramatic events of 2011. And the United States, charged with the sense that there was a democracy, a movement of democracy, much like the end of the Berlin Wall, the outbreak of democracy in Eastern Germany, in Poland, in the Czechoslovakia, future Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, Eastern Europe in general, that somehow as a result of revolution, democracy would follow. We did not appreciate. Our assessments were insufficient to understand and accept the fact that instead of democracy following a revolutionary change of circumstances, two things would follow. The first, chaos. Chaos that spread throughout the region of the Middle East. And second, a rise of Islamic fundamentalism and radical fundamentalism. Not democracy, but chaos and fundamentalism. And American policy, while upended in its assumptions and purposes, has found it very difficult to adapt our view of the world to the changing realities and the emerging realities of the region. Today, I think we're standing at another moment of transition. In this country, in our view of the Middle East, our understanding that the chaos that has broken out is deeply threatening to core American national interests. I believe that in this process, we have a chance to begin once again to find common ground with Egypt. I believe that that change is underway. It's still in its early phases. No nation shrugs off past predilections and takes new courses easily or simply or in uniformity. No political system adopts or adapts itself in lockstep. And so today, I think there is the beginning of a change. But we're facing an equally complex problem in Egypt herself. The view of the United States has been darkly overshadowed by an Egyptian view that we are not a friend of Egypt, of her stability and her progress, that the United States failed to appreciate the existential threat that Egypt and her society confronted, that the United States failed at a critical moment of history to appreciate that the overwhelming majority of Egyptians wanted a change. They wanted to put chaos behind them. They wanted to reestablish order. And in this moment in history, our paths have diverged. We not appreciating that the facts on the ground were different than our vision and dreams, and Egypt not appreciating the change that is gradual back to a position of strategic significance for Egypt in America's view of the region. And that's where we are today. And I believe that this relationship is as important today as it has ever been, both for Egypt and for the United States. And it must be restored. But it can't be restored by heated argument, by accusation, by assumptions about the ill will of the other party, but by a patient, careful exploration of what are the principles that bring our two countries together. Why are our national interests and those of Egypt congruent? Where do we need to move together again? And if we can go back and sit down calmly with each other, between two governments, between two medias, between two intellectual communities, between business communities and society at large, and begin to think again, what kind of world do we want? How can we each contribute to it? How can we each give the other space to accomplish it, to redefine those core principles that guided us in the earlier years of the relationship and find new definitions that will stabilize us into the future. So as I look today with all of you at this extraordinarily important set of ties between Egypt and the United States, between two peoples, two governments, two regions, to recognize that without the Egyptian-American relationship, there is not a strong basis of stability for any policies of either government or hope for stability more broadly in the region. And I'd like all of you, as I try each day myself, to commit myself to try to rethink where we've been, where we are, and where we're headed, and to do it calmly and with respect for each other's very different societies, and find ways once again to build what I know is a powerful, transformative relationship in the life of the Middle East and in the life of our two countries. Ladies and gentlemen, I've overspoken my piece, but I believe it very, very deeply, and I can only close by saying to all of you, Tahya Masr, Tahya Walad Mutahida.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Wisner, for a beautiful speech. Thanks to you all, and again, we repeat, Tahya Masr.
الحقيقة النهاردة المناسبة مهمة جدا لأنها ندوة خاصة بتجمع عدد من الشخصيات الأمريكية في مختلف المجالات، سواء الصحافة أو المجالات السياسية أو حتى الأمنية والقانونية. وكان الندوة بتناقش موضوع هو على رأس الموضوعات اللي العالم كله مهتم بيها، وهو الإرهاب. حاولنا احنا بصفتنا هنا بنمثل مصر ان احنا نوضح حقيقة الموقف المصري من الارهاب، بنوضح ازاي احنا بنواجه الارهاب داخل مصر وعلى الحدود الشرقية وعلى الحدود الغربية، وركزنا على ان هناك فجوة في الفهم ما بيننا وما بين بعض يعني الجوانب في السياسة الأمريكية، ان هم يعني بيحاولوا يفرضوا حاجات غير واقعية وغير منطقية على جموع الشعب المصري وعلى الحكومة المصرية.
Ambassador Wisner, thank you very much for coming to the event today.
Thank you for allowing me to be here to share this evening with you and all your guests. I admire what you're doing. The work you're doing is going to make it possible to help us all rebuild the Egyptian-American relationship, and you've just been terrific.
Did you think the panel was strong enough to discuss all the topics that, global events that are happening now?
Very much so. The people were well informed, articulate, and they expressed a variety of points of view. Some of them quite in contrast, one with the other, but that's what a democracy is about. Everybody has his own views. And I think we all learned a lot from the exchanges. And again, let me thank you, your colleagues, for putting this evening together. It's a great success.
How was your experience today in American Policy event, United We Stand?
I just have to tell you, you organized a hell of a meeting. This was one of the most effective meetings I've attended for the last few months. And as you can tell, the people here are not only engaged with what we are all having in Egypt in terms of progressive Egypt, in terms of a country that has a great deal of respect around the world, and you have brought that to light. And I'm very grateful for what has been achieved tonight in terms of people coming from all sectors of America and from the Congress, from the Senate, and from different parts of this administration and others, to just reflect how important is Egypt and just to understand the Egyptian will and the will of the Egyptian people. And we're so lucky to have the leadership in Egypt that we have today.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mahmoud. I know also you're involved in the American-Egyptian dialogue, and I would like to use the momentum and propose that somehow we can collaborate, American Pulse, with your organization to make this dialogue easier.
Yeah, as you hear today with people like Frank Wijner and others, it is so important that we highlight the importance of the Egyptian-American relationship. And through dialogue and through understanding of each other's needs and through respect to each other, we will really make great progress. We can be different and we can always have different of opinion about things, but at the same time we have to deal with each other with respect, and we have to make our points clear. And that's what we're doing. I think what Egypt is going through is historical, and it really brings a lot of needs for a dialogue. And that dialogue, we never give up. We will dialogue with everyone.
Today we have our attendees, Mike Damian. Welcome to American Pulse and United We Stand.
Thank you. Thank you for setting up this event tonight.
Thank you for coming, and I wanted to know how was your experience? How did you think of the event?
I think it was terrific. I think there were so many things to be grateful for. The attendees, the people that were here, were really representative of a lot of the Egyptian community here in America. We had a number of other people that are obviously involved in the concern for Egypt, people that weren't Egyptians, and the panel was terrific.
Tonight was a very important, enlightening discussion. This is one of the best discussion I have seen in the past 20 years here in New York. I think we have to increase the level of discussion to that level with honesty, with expertise. There was a huge expertise in the room, and the attendance was perfect. This kind of discussion is what can help in the awareness of the American public and also on the Egyptian public. It's very important that we continue this dialogue, and this event, as successful as it is, should be repeated and should be encouraged and should be expanded into more areas and arenas.
Now I'm very pleased for this occasion, and this is good opportunity. And what's good about it, to see our opinion, not only for the Egyptian, for senator, as a writer, and the congressman, which is very good for Egypt, and it's very important for Egypt to make our opinion, and can the American hear us and knows about the problem in Egypt, and the Egypt is the key in the area. It's very important for the area. It's the stability in the Middle East has from Egypt. And the terrorists usually start from Egypt. In the beginning, we know the history, start from long time, terrorism start in Egypt and spread all over. So I believe this happened event is very important to explain the opinion of Egypt to the world.
أنا النهارده الانطباع طبعا اللي خده معظم الحاضرين عن المؤتمر اللي حصل ان دي حاجه جميله جدا وحاجه راقيه جدا، والمفروض ان احنا كمصريين وكميونتي ان احنا نقدر ندعم البرنامج ونقدر ندعم مايكل في المجهود الكبير اللي بيقدمه. وان شاء الله باذن الله يعني نحاول نعمل سبورت للمرحله اللي جايه وندعم مصر. وتحيا مصر تحيا مصر تحيا مصر.
أنا اسمي فيبي من كير فور نيدي كابس. أنا أول مرة أحضر البانل. It was great. كان حلو جدا الواحد يشوف مجموعة من الأمريكان فاهمين إيه اللي بيحصل في مصر وبيشجعوا المصريين وواقفين ورانا. استفدت كتير جدا وعجبتني قوي المناقشات والأسئلة اللي كانت في الآخر كانت رائعة فعلا. يعني
الحقيقة أنا سعيدة جدا إن أنا جيت وحضرت الحفلة وبشيد بكل اللي حصل النهاردة إن احنا نقابل السيناتورز والناس المهمة في أمريكا عشان نوريهم احنا كمان شكلنا إيه. بصراحة كان الحفلة رائعة. مايكل عمل شغل جميل جدا و very proud of you guys. we're really happy.
الحفلة زي ما قالت مدام عزة تنظيم هايل. الجديد بقى انه طبعا احنا حضرنا في الايام اللي فاتت اكتر من فعالية بس كنا بنكلم كلنا بعض فان انت تكلم بعض دي مش حلوة لكن زي ما قالت مدام عزة وجود السيناتورز والمسؤولين دي مهمة جدا. احنا كمان خرجنا بحاجات كتير. احنا مش بس احنا بنكلمهم هم كمان احنا خرجنا منهم بشوية نقاط. هم اتكلموا كمان فتحوا قلبهم. المفروض اعطوا اشارات لبعض الحاجات لو حضرتك خدت بالك مهمة قوي. هم طبعا ندمانين على الفترة اللي فاتت ان قصة التعاون ندمانين على التعاون بيننا وبين حتت تانية صفقات السلاح والكلام دون. فبتهيألي ان اللي جاي هيبقى افضل. هم هيحاولوا يحسنوا علاقتهم بمصر وده مهم جدا.
انا النهارده كنت مبسوط جدا ان انا احضر الميتنج. كانت ميتنج جيدة جدا. اول مرة ان يبقى في جروب امريكاني موجود. دايما في اجتماعاتنا كان بيبقى في مصريين بس كنا بنحس ان احنا بنكلم نفسنا. دلوقتي مع الدكتور مايكل وهو جاب المجموعة والكونجرس فبنحس ان احنا دلوقتي وصلنا رأينا للرأي الامريكي ونتمنى تبقى في فعاليات زي كده تاني في القريب العاجل بإذن الله.